It was on a warm evening in Ouagadougou when Captain Ibrahim Traore stood before a sea of people, flanked by microphones, cameras, and an expectant crowd. The press conference had been called suddenly, without prior notice, but by nightfall, word had spread across Burkina Faso and beyond. Traore was going to speak about Thomas Sankara. 4 years, Sankara's assassination in 1987 remained a painful scar in the hearts of Burkinabe people. Many whispered France's name in hushed tones, but no leader had ever dared to say it loudly, not in public, not in front of cameras. Traore broke that silence. With a calm but firm voice, he began. The murder of our revolutionary leader, Thomas Sankara, was not a coincidence, nor an act of internal betrayal alone. It was part of a calculated plan. France, yes, the France that once colonized us, was behind it. They feared Sankara because he wanted true independence for Africa. He rejected their chains. For this, they silenced him. The words hit like thunder. Journalists gasped. Some scribbled frantically while others froze, unsure if they had truly heard what they thought they had. Traore leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Thomas Sankara represented a threat to the neo-colonial order. He spoke of self-sufficiency, dignity, and breaking away from French control. Do you think it was a coincidence that bullets ended his dream just when his ideas were spreading across Africa? No. France played its role, and the truth can no longer be buried. Within minutes, the statement spread like wildfire. Videos of Traore's speech circulated on social media, subtitled in multiple languages. Pan-Africanists across the continent hailed him as a bold truth-teller, a new Sankara in spirit. But the West reacted with fury. In Paris, the French government called the accusations baseless, dangerous, and irresponsible. Western media outlets painted Traore as a reckless populist stirring up anti-French sentiment. But in Africa, crowds poured into the streets, chanting Sankara's name alongside Traore's. Murals of Sankara and Traore appeared overnight in Ouagadougou, painted by young artists who saw in him the continuation of Sankara's legacy. Sanctions soon followed. France froze aid packages and pressured the European Union to suspend certain development projects in Burkina Faso. The US voiced deep concern and joined in applying diplomatic pressure. Western media outlets labeled Traore a dictator in the making, trying to isolate him. But instead of crumbling, he grew stronger. If sanctions are the price for telling the truth, he declared in another fiery address, then let them sanction us. We will drink water from our rivers, eat from our farms, and build with our own hands. The time for depending on our oppressors is over. His words electrified young Africans across the continent. From Dakar to Nairobi, students marched with placards that read, "Sankara lives through Traore," and "France must answer for Africa's blood." Behind the scenes, the backlash was not just economic. Intelligence reports hinted at unusual activities near Burkina Faso's borders. Strange movements of armed groups raised suspicion that foreign hands were once again stirring chaos. Diplomats whispered of plots being drafted to contain Traore before he became another Sankara, this time too difficult to silence. Inside his government, not everyone was comfortable. Some ministers warned him privately, "Captain, the West has long arms. They will not forgive these words. You have made powerful enemies." But Traore only smiled, his jaw set like iron. "If truth makes me enemies, then so be it. I would rather die standing with Sankara's spirit than live bowing to neo-colonial masters." The threats only elevated his image among the people. Farmers began naming their newborn sons Ibrahim Sankara. Across African diaspora communities in Europe and America, rallies were held in his support. But the more popular he became, the more dangerous his position grew. By the second month after his statement, Burkina Faso was facing severe financial blockades. International banks, under Western influence, slowed transactions. French companies threatened to pull out, leaving thousands jobless. The IMF and World Bank sent veiled warnings about economic instability. Yet Traore stood tall. He launched campaigns urging Burkinabe citizens to embrace local industries. Government convoys carried food and supplies from rural farms to cities, bypassing foreign corporations. For the first time in decades, The people felt they were standing on their own feet, even if shakily. He repeated Sankara's famous words. "We must accept to live as Africans, to rely on our strength. He who feeds you controls you. Today, I tell the world, Burkina Faso will never again be a puppet of France." But even as his courage inspired millions, the dangers multiplied. Western diplomats whispered in corridors about regime change. Media outlets aired smear campaigns, calling him unstable, dictatorial, and a threat to democracy. Armed groups at the borders waited for opportunities to destabilize the country. Still, Ibrahim Traore refused to bow. Each day his voice grew louder, his defiance more unshakable. And with each passing week, he etched himself deeper into history, reviving Sankara's ghost and daring the world to confront a truth they had long tried to bury. The battle was only beginning. The weight of sanctions pressed hard on Burkina Faso. Imports slowed to a trickle, fuel prices skyrocketed, and international corporations began withdrawing their presence. Ordinary citizens stood in long queues for basic goods. Western media painted images of a country in collapse, blaming Traore's reckless words. But within the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, something different was happening. Instead of breaking, the people rallied. Murals of Sankara now stood beside freshly painted portraits of Traore, their faces side by side under slogans like "The struggle continues" and "Burkina Faso will never kneel." On a national broadcast, Traore addressed the nation in his military fatigues, a red beret pulled low over his brow. His words carried both reassurance and fire. "Brothers and sisters of Burkina Faso, they think by starving us, they will weaken us. They think sanctions will bend us into begging. But let them know this: hunger is nothing compared to the hunger for freedom. And that hunger, no sanction can satisfy." The people erupted into applause across living rooms, bars, and marketplaces. In villages, radios echoed his words deep into the night. As France and its Western allies tightened their grip, Traore turned east and south. He began forging alliances with nations equally disillusioned with Western dominance. Russia and China, already seeking footholds in Africa, extended their hands. Moscow promised grain, arms, and energy support. Beijing pledged infrastructure investments in exchange for raw materials. In a historic meeting in Ouagadougou, Traore stood with envoys from Mali and Niger. Together, the three leaders signed what they called the Pact of Sovereignty. "If they sanction one of us, they sanction all of us," Traore declared. "We will build our future with our own hands, with friends who respect us, not masters who exploit us." The pact shook the geopolitical balance. Western diplomats scrambled to contain the ripple effect, but the image of three African leaders standing shoulder to shoulder against centuries of domination went viral worldwide. But enemies moved quickly. Western media unleashed a flood of reports painting Traore as authoritarian, corrupt, and dangerously aligned with Russia. International think tanks began publishing papers about the decline of democracy in Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, shadowy groups inside Burkina Faso, some with suspected links to foreign intelligence, began stirring unrest. Fake pamphlets circulated, accusing Traore of selling the nation to China. Paid agitators staged protests in the capital, trying to portray him as unpopular. But the propaganda failed to shake the bond between Traore and his people. Ordinary Burkinabés saw through the lies. Farmers donated food to soldiers at the borders. Women in marketplaces organized campaigns chanting, "Sankara fought, Traore fights." In one particularly symbolic event, a group of young men carried a coffin draped in French flags through the streets of Ouagadougou, chanting, "Here lies neo-colonialism." Traore knew the real battle was not only economic or political. It was survival. His intelligence officers intercepted chatter about plans to assassinate him, much like Sankara decades before. Unknown men were caught surveying his residence. Caravans of arms were intercepted along Burkina Faso's borders, allegedly supplied by friendly nations. One evening, in a private meeting with his generals, Traore spoke with chilling clarity. "They killed Sankara because he stood too tall. They will try to kill me too. But this time, Africa is watching. If they strike me down, they will not silence the fire. The fire has already spread. The room fell silent. His commanders, though hardened soldiers, felt the weight of those words. Across Africa, Traore's defiance became a rallying cry. In Ghana, students marched with placards that read, "Justice for Sankara, support for Traore." In South Africa, Pan-African movements held conferences praising Burkina Faso's resistance. Even in Europe, African diaspora communities staged protests outside French embassies, chanting his name. African musicians began weaving his speeches into their songs. Poets compared him to Lumumba, Sankara, and Nkrumah. He was no longer just a Burkinabe leader. He was fast becoming a symbol of African resistance. But symbols attract enemies. The more popular he became, the more determined his adversaries grew. Sanctions deepened. France recalled its ambassador. Western leaders muttered about military options. And in dark rooms far from Ouagadougou, men in suits whispered, "We must remove him before it is too late." Burkina Faso stood at the edge of a storm. The economy trembled under sanctions, enemies circled like vultures, and foreign intelligence worked tirelessly to destabilize the country. But inside the heart of the nation, the people's spirit had never been stronger. Traore, unyielding and unbroken, walked with Sankara's ghost beside him, determined not to let history repeat itself. The world was watching, holding its breath, as the young captain prepared for the battles yet to come. Battles not only for Burkina Faso's survival, but for the soul of Africa itself. The night air in Ouagadougou grew heavier with each passing week. Sanctions had bitten deep into the economy. Fuel lines snaked through streets, and the price of bread had tripled. But the people still held on. They muttered in marketplaces, "If Traore falls, then Sankara truly died in vain." Yet, in the smoke-filled rooms of foreign embassies and luxury hotels, plans were unfolding. Traore's open defiance against France had crossed a red line. To the west, he was no longer a young captain. They saw him as a virus, a spark that could ignite rebellion across Africa. And viruses had to be contained. Rumors began to swirl of a coup in the making. A handful of senior officers, men who had trained in France and owed favors to Paris, were secretly meeting in military barracks. Their conversations were intercepted by loyal intelligence officers. One night, Traore was handed a file marked "Urgent," internal betrayal. Inside were transcripts of conversations where his own generals discussed replacing him before the country falls into chaos. One even remarked, "Traore thinks he is Sankara, but Sankara died. So will he." For hours, the young captain sat in silence, staring at the file. Finally, he closed it and looked at his aide-de-camp. History is repeating itself, but this time we must break the cycle. Sankara trusted too much. I will not. Days later, the first strike came. As Traore's convoy moved along a dusty road toward the outskirts of the capital, a sudden explosion rocked the earth, a roadside bomb. His lead vehicle was shredded to metal, flames rising into the sky. But Traore survived. His armored truck, purchased through secret arrangements with allies, withstood the blast. He emerged, shaken but alive, his uniform dusty yet intact. News of the attempt spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered outside the presidential compound chanting, "They tried to kill him, but God protects Sankara's son." The failed assassination only deepened the people's loyalty. Behind the scenes, investigations pointed fingers at mercenaries slipping in from a neighboring country. Weapons traced back to Western suppliers. And in one chilling discovery, a captured suspect revealed under interrogation. We were promised money and safe passage. Instructions came from men who spoke French, not as Africans, but as masters. Though Traore refrained from publicly naming names, his close circle knew the truth. France's shadow loomed large. While bullets failed, words were sharpened. Western outlets ran relentless campaigns. Traore is unstable. Burkina Faso faces collapse. A dictator in the making. Opinion pieces appeared in international newspapers, subtly pushing for international intervention to restore stability. Even African leaders tied closely to the West began distancing themselves, afraid of sanctions or of being targeted next. In private, some whispered, "He is courageous, yes, but he is playing with fire. And fire burns." But in the streets of Ouagadougou, school children painted murals of Traore with Sankara's quote, "While revolutionaries as individuals can be murdered, you cannot kill ideas." The greatest blow came not from foreign lands, but from within his circle. One of his closest ministers, a man Traore considered a brother, was caught passing classified information to foreign diplomats. When confronted, the man broke down. "I had no choice. They threatened my family. They promised me safety if I cooperated. Captain, forgive me." Traore said nothing for a long while, only staring at him. Then, with a heavy heart, he whispered, "Sankara trusted his brothers too much, and they killed him. I will not repeat that mistake. You are relieved of your duties." The betrayal wounded him deeply, but it also hardened his resolve. In the midst of chaos, Traore called for another press conference. Cameras flashed as he walked in, standing before the world once again. His voice, steady but edged with fire, cut through the silence. "They want me dead. They want Burkina Faso on its knees. But let it be known, I am not afraid. If I fall, millions of Africans will rise. If they kill me, I will live in the hearts of the people like Sankara. France, you can silence men, but you cannot silence truth. And truth is now louder than your guns." The statement went viral, again. Across Africa, hashtags trended. Hashtag I stand with Traore and hashtag justice for Sankara. Youth in Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Dakar marched in solidarity. He was no longer just Burkina Faso's captain. He was the voice of a continent's defiance. Still, danger grew closer. Intelligence revealed foreign operatives had entered Burkina Faso, posing as aid workers and journalists. Strange shipments were intercepted at border checkpoints. Traore slept little, moving between secure locations, aware that at any moment the bullet meant for him might finally find its mark. But through it all, he refused to bend. He was not merely fighting for power. He was carrying Sankara's ghost on his shoulders, fighting to ensure that this time, Africa's dream would not be strangled in its cradle. And in the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, amidst sanctions, hunger, and threats, the people whispered a prayer. "May God protect the captain, for if he falls, we all fall." The streets of Ouagadougou carried a heavy silence. Soldiers in camouflage patrolled intersections, their rifles slung low but their eyes sharp. Everyone knew something dangerous was brewing. The air itself carried it, like the quiet before a storm. Inside the presidential compound, Captain Ibrahim Traore was meeting with his closest generals. A map of West Africa lay sprawled across the table. His finger moved across Mali, Niger, Guinea. "If they come for me," he said, his voice low but firm, "they won't just be coming for Burkina Faso. They'll be coming for all of us. We need each other more than ever." It wasn't just talk. Within weeks, the young captain traveled secretly to Bamako and Niamey. Away from the eyes of foreign spies, he sat with the leaders of Mali and Niger. Men who, like him, had broken away from France's shadow. The three of them formed what they would call the Alliance of Sahel States. More than a pact, it was a declaration. Military cooperation. If one was attacked, the others would respond. Economic exchange. Shared resources to weaken reliance on Western imports. Intelligence sharing. A united front against mercenaries and coup plots. Traore stood before his brothers in arms and declared, "They assassinated Sankara to kill the dream. But the dream has multiplied. They cannot kill us all." The alliance sent shockwaves through West Africa. For the first time in decades, France realized its grip on the Sahel was loosening fast. But the stronger Traore's alliances grew, the more determined his enemies became. In a villa on the outskirts of Abidjan, a group of foreign operatives sat around a table. Some spoke in French, others in English. Maps of Ouagadougou lay open before them. The leader, a man with a scar across his cheek, tapped the map. "The captain survives bombs. He survives propaganda. He survives betrayal. But everyone can be touched. We will get close to him. Closer than his guards." The plan was chilling. Using fake press credentials, the team intended to infiltrate one of Traore's scheduled press briefings. The idea was simple: a hidden pistol, a handshake too close, a bullet at point-blank range. Funds were wired. Weapons were smuggled. And somewhere inside Burkina Faso's capital, traitors were already on payroll to clear the way. But fate, as always, played its hand. A junior intelligence officer in Burkina Faso, a young man barely 25, intercepted a coded message. At first, he thought it was routine chatter. But the more he listened, the more his heart raced. He rushed to the compound, papers in hand. Bursting into the room where Traore was reviewing reports, he saluted and spoke breathlessly. "Captain, they are coming. Not from the borders this time. They plan to dress as journalists. They want to shoot you during the next press conference." Traore leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, the room was silent. Then he spoke quietly, almost as if to himself. "So Sankara's story repeats again. Only this time, I am waiting for them." The morning of the press conference arrived. The hall was filled with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones ready. Traore walked in with his usual calm, his red beret tilted just right. But what no one knew was that his intelligence had set a trap. Among the crowd of journalists, plainclothes security officers mingled, eyes sharp for the assassins. Traore took the stage. His voice rang out. "They sanction us. They smear us. And now they wish to kill us. But let me say this clearly. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid only of betrayal. Sankara was betrayed by his own. I stand here to prove that this time, the people themselves are my shield." As the room erupted in applause, a man in the third row reached inside his jacket. His hand brushed against the grip of a pistol. But before he could draw, two security officers lunged, dragging him to the ground. The crowd gasped as the weapon clattered across the floor. The assassin screamed in French, "You think you are untouchable? France will not forgive you." The hall descended into chaos. Cameras rolled, capturing everything. The attempted murder, the foiled plot, the captain standing firm as soldiers subdued the mercenary. That evening, videos of the failed assassination circled the globe. Traore's calm figure, unmoved even as danger struck at arm's length, became a symbol of defiance. In a televised address later that night, his voice shook the world. "They tried to kill Sankara. They killed him. They tried to kill me today. They failed. And they will keep failing, because Burkina Faso does not stand alone. Africa is rising. And no assassin's bullet can stop the march of a people toward freedom." Crowds flooded the streets, waving flags, chanting his name. For the first time, even those who had doubted him now whispered, "Perhaps this man was chosen for this moment." But in the shadows, the conspirators were not finished. The scar-faced leader of the plot watched the footage from a safe house. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly, and muttered, "If bullets cannot kill him, we will burn his country around him." The storm had only just begun. The failed assassination attempt had turned Traore into a symbol of defiance across Africa. But for his enemies, it was not a defeat, it was a challenge. If they could not kill him directly, then they would strangle Burkina Faso by fire and chaos. Within weeks, reports began flooding in. Strange groups of armed men crossing the borders at night, torching villages, ambushing soldiers, spreading fear. They were not ordinary bandits. Their weapons were sophisticated, their movements too coordinated. Burkinabe intelligence whispered the truth everyone already suspected. Foreign-backed insurgents had been unleashed. In the northern province of Somme, villagers awoke to gunfire. Armed men stormed the market square, firing into the air, shouting, "This is the price of following Traore. You want independence? You will starve and burn." They left behind bodies and fear, retreating into the forests before the army could respond. Soon, other provinces suffered similar attacks. Bridges were blown up. Power lines mysteriously collapsed. Grain warehouses went up in flames. Burkina Faso's fragile economy, already straining under sanctions, began to creak under the pressure. Western newspapers carried headlines like, "Burkina Faso descends into chaos under Traore," carefully omitting who funded the chaos. In Ouagadougou, Traore gathered his military council. His face was tense, his beret shadowing his eyes. They could not kill me with bullets, so now they kill my people instead. This is not just terrorism, this is war, disguised as banditry. They think Burkina Faso will collapse. But they do not know us. He ordered the creation of civil defense committees across villages, local militias, trained and armed to defend their homes. He increased joint patrols with Mali and Niger, stretching the new alliance of Sahel states into a living shield. On national radio, he addressed the nation. Brothers and sisters, they want to break us with fear. But I say to you, the farmer with his hoe, the mother with her courage, the youth with his will, you are the army of this nation. Together, we will not bend. Across the country, men and women volunteered in droves. Farmers left their fields to train with rifles. Youth groups painted slogans on walls, "We are Sankara's children," and "Burkina will not kneel." But even as the people rose, the enemy struck deeper. In Ouagadougou, the national power grid suddenly collapsed. Entire districts went dark for days. Investigations revealed it wasn't technical failure, it was sabotage. Not long after, the central bank reported a mysterious cyber attack. Millions vanished overnight, traced through shadowy offshore accounts. Economists inside Traore's government warned, "Captain, they are not just attacking with guns. They are attacking our lifeline. If we cannot pay soldiers or feed our people, morale will break." But Traore stood, his jaw set. "Then we will pay them with courage. We will feed them with dignity. Our ancestors survived slavery, hunger, and chains. We will survive this." Behind closed doors, however, the weight bore down on him. Traore often walked the compound at night alone, staring at the stars. Some nights, he remembered Sankara, how easily betrayal from within had ended his life. He wondered if the same fate awaited him. But then he would hear chants from the streets, voices of his people crying, "Long live Traore! Long live Sankara!" And the doubt melted into fire. The insurgents made their boldest move yet one dawn near the Burkinabe-Mali border. Hundreds of fighters stormed a military outpost, overwhelming it with heavy machine guns and RPGs. By afternoon, word spread that the outpost had fallen. The West reported gleefully, Burkina Faso losing grip on security. But what they didn't know was that Traore himself had traveled north in secret. Flanked by elite soldiers, he stood on the front lines. His presence electrified the troops. One soldier whispered, "He is not like other leaders who hide in palaces. He fights with us." Under his command, the Burkinabe forces launched a counteroffensive. For 2 days, the fighting raged. Finally, the insurgents retreated, leaving behind dozens of dead and captured weapons, many stamped with markings of Western suppliers. Traore addressed his men on the battlefield, dust on his boots, rifle in hand. "This is the proof. They arm our enemies and call them bandits. But we are not afraid. As long as one Burkinabe breathes, this land will never belong to France again." The footage of him speaking, surrounded by exhausted but triumphant soldiers, went viral across Africa. The young captain, fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men, became not just a leader, but a living legend. But even in victory, the storm deepened. The insurgents had only been testing the waters. More were coming. More weapons, more sabotage, more betrayal. In the corridors of Western capitals, officials whispered, "He is too popular now. Killing him will make him a martyr. We must bleed him slowly. His country will collapse before he does." And in Ouagadougou, as the people celebrated their victory, Traore knew the truth. The war was only just beginning. The dust from the northern battle had barely settled when a new crisis emerged. Sanctions had drained Burkina Faso's reserves, cyber attacks had crippled its banking system, and imports had slowed to a crawl. Families survived on scraps, fuel was rationed, and farmers worried about the coming planting season. In the West, headlines screamed, "Burkina Faso on the brink of collapse." Analysts predicted the captain would soon fall, not by a bullet, but by hunger. But Traore refused to kneel. One evening, he gathered his cabinet and military council. Maps, trade charts, and stacks of documents filled the war room. Traore pointed to them with unshaking resolve. If the West blocks our economy, then we will build another. We do not need their francs, their euros, or their dollars. We have gold, cotton, livestock, and land. We will trade like free men, barter if we must, but never beg. Steps he took. Gold reserves. Burkina Faso, rich in gold, redirected its mines. Instead of exporting through French companies, he began trading directly with allies, Russia, China, and even Middle Eastern nations. Payment came not in euros, but in wheat, fuel, and medicine. Barter deals. With Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso launched a barter system. Grain for cattle, cotton for fuel. It was clumsy at first, but soon markets began to stabilize. Local currency push. Traore announced plans for a Sahel-wide currency, free from the French-controlled CFA franc. If France controls your money, he said on national TV, France controls your life. We must cut this chain. At first, Western media mocked the idea. But when videos surfaced of markets in Ouagadougou buzzing again with local trade, farmers smiling as they exchanged produce for tools, the mockery turned to unease. Yet, even as the economy found new routes, danger festered within. Intelligence officers delivered disturbing news. Several high-ranking officers in the army were secretly plotting to overthrow Traore. They were men trained in Paris, accustomed to Western ties, and now frustrated by sanctions that drained their personal luxuries. A secret midnight meeting was intercepted. The generals had discussed replacing Traore with a more cooperative leader. One of them, emboldened, said, "This boy thinks he is Sankara reborn. But Sankara died young. So will he." When confronted, they denied everything. But the evidence was damning. Traore faced a heavy choice: purge them and risk dividing the army, or keep them close and risk another Sankara-style betrayal. After days of restless nights, he acted. In a dramatic move, 3 top generals were dismissed and placed under house arrest. On television, Traore explained with grave clarity, "Burkina Faso cannot afford traitors in uniform. We face enemies on our borders, enemies in the shadows, and enemies in foreign capitals. We will not tolerate enemies in our own army." The purge shocked the nation. Some feared it would fracture the military, but to ordinary citizens, it was proof the captain would not bow, not even to those in brass and stars. But the purge had consequences. Western embassies immediately cried foul, accusing Traore of sliding into authoritarianism. Aid groups pulled out, citing security concerns. Rumors swirled that France was quietly funding another coup attempt through dismissed officers now in exile. The air grew thick with paranoia. Who could be trusted? Was the aide serving his food loyal, or bought? Were the officers saluting him in parades secretly sharpening knives for his back? Traore himself admitted to a close confidant. The hardest war is not fought on battlefields. It is fought in the shadows, where you do not know your enemies until they stab you. And yet, amidst all the storms, his bond with the people only deepened. Farmers delivered food to the capital as gifts. Youth patrols volunteered to protect government buildings at night. Women in villages sang songs that wove his name with Sankaras. A grandmother in Bobo Dioulasso was quoted on radio. "Sankara was our son. They killed him. Now God has given us another. If they kill this one, Africa itself will rise." By now, the world could no longer ignore him. African leaders whispered his name in private meetings, some admiring, others fearful. In the corridors of the African Union, debates grew heated. Should they support Traore and risk Western wrath, or remain silent and watch Burkina Faso bleed? Meanwhile, in Paris, the French foreign minister slammed his fist on the table during a closed meeting. If this boy succeeds, France loses not just Burkina Faso. We lose Africa. He must be stopped. And so, plans deepened. Plans darker than sanctions, darker than propaganda. Plans that would test the very soul of Burkina Faso. On the anniversary of Sankara's assassination, Traore stood before a massive crowd in Ouagadougou. His words carried the weight of both memory and defiance. They killed our father, Thomassankara, because he dreamed of a free Africa. They now try to kill his sons and daughters. But let them know this: we are no longer one man. We are millions. If they kill me, I will rise in 1,000 voices. Burkina Faso will never kneel. The roar that followed shook the city. Drones captured the crowd, millions waving flags, chanting, crying. The footage spread across the world. And somewhere, in a shadowy room far away, a voice coldly said, "Then we will not just kill the man. We will burn his dream." The storm was only gathering strength. Burkina Faso was breathing, but every breath was labored. Sanctions had cut deep, sabotage had drained resources, and betrayal within had almost broken its spine. Now, a new weapon was unleashed: hunger. Ships carrying grain and fuel mysteriously never arrived at West African ports. Trucks carrying supplies from neighboring states were hijacked before reaching Burkina Faso. Prices in the markets exploded overnight. A bag of maize that once cost a family a week's wages now devoured a month's salary. Mothers lined up in the scorching sun for rice, only to return home with empty bowls. Children cried themselves to sleep. It was not chance. Intelligence reports confirmed what Traore already suspected. Powerful Western hands were bribing Burkina Faso's neighbors to delay, block, or redirect supplies. An officer who defected whispered bitterly, "They don't need to drop bombs anymore. They just close the taps." Hunger kills faster than bullets. Western media carried staged stories of humanitarian disaster in Burkina Faso, blaming it not on sanctions, but on Traore's reckless anti-Western stance. As famine grew, so did violence. Armed militias, better armed than ever before, began moving closer to Ouagadougou. Their attacks were no longer confined to remote villages. One dawn, a convoy of pickup trucks stormed a police station just outside the capital. They left behind burning vehicles and the chilling message painted on the walls: "Traore must fall." Fear gripped the city. Shops shuttered. Families fled deeper into the countryside. The West called it terrorism, but the weapons told another story. Sleek rifles, night vision gear, encrypted radios, none of which poor bandits could afford. In the presidential compound, Traore faced his generals. The map of Burkina Faso looked like a bleeding body, red pins marking attacks across its borders and even within its heart. "They are tightening the noose," a general said grimly. "They want the people to starve, to turn against you. And with militias at the gates, Captain, the country could fall." Traore stood, eyes blazing. "Let them come with hunger, let them come with bullets. This is no longer just about me. This is about Africa. If we fall, every African leader who dreams of freedom will think twice. I will not surrender. If we must eat leaves and drink from streams, so be it. But we will not kneel." His words, carried live on radio, electrified the people. Crowds once again poured into the streets, shouting, "We will eat roots before we bow." To fight famine, Traore doubled down on the parallel economy. Smugglers who once worked for foreign corporations now worked for the state, sneaking grain and medicine across borders. Farmers were mobilized to produce food not just for themselves, but for cities under rationing. Gold was exchanged directly for wheat and oil with non-Western partners. Russian cargo planes landed at night with grain, Chinese shipments brought medicines, while Iranian tankers delivered fuel through backdoor deals. The system was fragile, but it kept the nation alive. The West fumed, unable to choke him fully. Then came the boldest strike yet. Militias, 100 strong, launched a coordinated attack just miles from Ouagadougou. Explosions echoed through the night, shaking homes, waking children. The capital held its breath. But this time, Traore was ready. He had fortified the city with militias of his own, ordinary citizens trained into fighters. Farmers, teachers, and students now carried rifles alongside soldiers. Together, they formed a wall of resistance. For 2 nights, gunfire rattled the outskirts of the city. Burkinabe forces, led personally by Traore in fatigues and rifles slung across his shoulder, fought back with ferocity. By dawn, the militias had been repelled. Their bodies littered the dusty roads, their weapons seized and displayed before cameras. The people cheered, not just for survival, but for defiance. But the West twisted the story. International networks aired clips of smoke and gunfire, claiming Burkina Faso descends into civil war under Traore. They showed starving children but carefully edited out the Russian food convoys and community militias. In the halls of the UN, Western diplomats called for humanitarian intervention, a polite word for regime change. Yet African youth saw through the lies. In Accra, Lagos, Kinshasa, and Nairobi, thousands marched in solidarity, waving both Burkina Faso and Sankara's flags. Hashtags trended. Hashtag hands off Burkina and hashtag Traore the lion. Exhausted but unbroken, Traore appeared on national television days later. His uniform was dusty, his voice hoarse, but his gaze sharp. They burn our villages. They starve our children. They send mercenaries to kill us. But here we stand, not broken, not bowed. To Africa I say this. Today it is Burkina Faso. Tomorrow it may be you. The chains of colonialism are tightening around all our necks. If we do not resist together, we will all suffocate. The broadcast spread across the continent. In the eyes of many, he was no longer just Burkina Faso's captain. He was Africa's captain. But even as cheers echoed, darker whispers spread. Reports surfaced of another assassination plot, this time involving poison, with insiders suspected of being bought off. Traitors still walked inside the compound. And in Western capitals, plans grew bolder. One official, his face hidden in shadow, said coldly, "We failed with bullets. We failed with hunger. Then we will burn his dream with fire he cannot control, chaos itself." Burkina Faso had survived battles, betrayals, and famine. But the greatest test was yet to come. The dust of battle still lingered over Ouagadougou when a new danger slithered in, unseen. This time it did not come with rifles or sanctions. It came in silence, on the tip of a cup. For weeks, Traore's intelligence had been whispering of a plot inside the compound itself. Mercenaries had failed, militias had failed, but now the enemy sought to use the oldest weapon of power struggles: poison. One evening, as the captain sat down for a late meal with his aides, his closest guard, a wiry veteran named Suleiman, noticed something strange. The glass of water placed before Traore shimmered faintly, as though touched by something oily. Suspicious, Suleiman quickly switched the glasses. Within minutes of drinking, the guard collapsed. His body convulsed violently, foam spilling from his mouth. He was rushed to the infirmary, but it was too late. The poison was swift. Traore stood over his fallen guard's body, his face like stone. He knew what this meant. The hand that had placed the cup was not that of an enemy outside, but of someone inside his walls. The compound was locked down. Soldiers swept the kitchens, interrogated staff, and searched every corner. After 2 days of questioning, the truth surfaced. A junior cook had been paid in foreign currency to slip poison into the captain's drink. When dragged before Traore, the man wept. "They promised me my family would be taken abroad. They said if I did this, my children would have a better life. Captain, forgive me." Traore looked at him for a long, heavy moment before replying. "It is not you who betrayed me. It is the world that betrayed Africa, teaching our children that survival comes from betraying their own blood. Take him away." The cook was imprisoned, but the deeper wound remained, the realization that the enemy had reached into his very table. Even as Traore fought poison at home, storms gathered abroad. At the United Nations, Western diplomats painted a grim picture of Burkina Faso, a failed state under a reckless soldier, human rights abuses, famine, civil war. Whispers of humanitarian intervention grew louder. Some called for peacekeepers. Others spoke of sanctions with teeth. But in the same halls, African youth activists rose in defiance, accusing the West of hypocrisy. Videos of Traore standing on battlefields circulated widely, showing not a dictator hiding in luxury, but a soldier among his men. "If this man is a tyrant," one Nigerian activist declared, "then give us more tyrants like him." In the quiet of his office, Traore felt the weight pressing heavier. His eyes burned from sleepless nights. His nation was under siege, his allies threatened, and now his very food had turned against him. He confided in a trusted minister. "They are tightening the walls around me. First they tried to kill my body. Now they try to kill my spirit. But I cannot break. If I fall, millions will believe resistance is impossible. Yet even in solitude, he carried Sankara's ghost like armor. He pinned a photo of the fallen revolutionary on his desk and whispered, "They killed you, but your dream did not die. They will not kill me without the dream becoming fire." Determined to turn pain into strength, Traore tightened internal security. Every soldier and staff member in the compound was screened. Loyalty oaths were renewed. Villagers across the country sent food directly to the presidency, fearing foreign infiltration. The people whispered with pride, "Even poison cannot kill our captain." And beyond Burkina Faso, something new stirred. Across Africa, protests against French bases erupted. Youth demanded troops withdraw, chanting Traore's name as though it were a battle cry. But as his popularity soared, so did the desperation of his enemies. Western powers convened in secret, concluding that destabilization alone was not enough. A more decisive move was needed. Something final. In a secured conference room, a French official's words cut through the haze of cigarette smoke. "We cannot allow another Sankara to live long enough to inspire a continent. If we do not act now, Africa will slip from our grasp forever." And so, darker plans were drawn. Plans not just to kill a man, but to extinguish a rising fire before it became an inferno. The stage was set. Burkina Faso stood on the edge of something historic. Freedom or fire, survival or collapse. And at its center was a young captain, hunted by the most powerful nations on earth, but still unbowed. The final storm was coming. The sky over Ouagadougou was heavy that morning, dark clouds rolling low, as though the heavens themselves sensed the storm that was about to break. For months, the young captain had defied every weapon thrown at him. Bullets, bombs, betrayal, famine, poison. And now, the West prepared its final move. Intelligence reports reached Traore's desk. A coalition of foreign-backed militias, numbering in the thousands, was massing at Burkina Faso's borders. Satellite images confirmed camps filled with weapons, mortars, drones, armored trucks. Behind them, whispers of Western special operatives guiding the hand. The plan was clear: strike directly at the capital, overthrow Traore, and install a puppet to restore the old order. In Paris, a French general told his advisors bluntly, "This will end like Sankara. We cut the head, and the body will fall." But what they did not expect was that this time, the body was not just Burkina Faso, it was a continent awakening. On the eve of the attack, Traore went live on national television. His voice carried not just to Burkinabe ears, but across Africa, streamed on phones and radios from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. "Brothers and sisters of Africa, the storm has come. They want to finish what they started with Sankara. They want to kill me, to kill the hope that Africa can rise. But let me say this: if I fall, do not mourn me. Rise. Rise with one voice and show the world Africa cannot be broken." His words spread like wildfire. Youth in Lagos marched. Students in Nairobi held vigils. Protesters in Johannesburg raised banners that read, "If Traore falls, Africa rises." The militias came at dawn, pouring toward the capital in waves. Explosions shook the outskirts. Smoke billowed into the sky. But inside Ouagadougou, the city did not cower. Farmers armed with rifles stood beside soldiers. Mothers banged pots in defiance, refusing to flee. Youth militias, trained in secret, filled the streets, blocking entry points. The air thundered with chants. "We are Sankara's children. We are Traore's shield." Traore himself took to the front lines, rifle slung across his chest, red beret catching the wind. He moved among his men, calm as fire, reminding them, "They may have more weapons, but we have something they do not, a cause worth dying for." The battle raged for hours. Gunfire echoed through the capital. But the resistance was fierce, unyielding. What was meant to be a swift toppling turned into a quagmire, a city that refused to kneel. As the enemy faltered, a desperate plan was triggered. A drone, guided from far away, slipped through the chaos, its target locked on the captain himself. Soldiers shouted warnings as the buzzing filled the sky. Traore looked up, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle strapped to his back. There was no time. The explosion tore through the battlefield. Smoke and dust swallowed everything. When it cleared, soldiers rushed to where their captain had stood. Traore lay still, blood on his uniform, his red beret torn and blackened. His men froze, the shock sinking like stone. The West believed they had finally succeeded. But before silence could swallow the field, something extraordinary happened. The soldiers around him lifted his body high, his bloodied beret resting on his chest, and began chanting with thunderous voices. Traore lives! Sankara lives! Africa lives! The cries spread through the city, from barricades to rooftops, until all of Ouagadougou roared. Women wept, children shouted, men raised their rifles skyward. Across Africa, phones lit up with images of the fallen captain carried by his people, his body now a banner. The militias, hearing the roar, faltered. Their morale broke. They had killed a man, but in doing so, they had created a martyr. The battle ended with Burkina Faso bloodied but unbowed. The West withdrew its hand quietly, unwilling to face the tidal wave of outrage. Across the continent, protests erupted. Statues of Traore appeared beside those of Sankara. His speeches were replayed on radio, his words etched into banners. In death, the young captain achieved what no bullet, sanction, or poison could stop. He lit the fire of African resistance once again. Years later, in classrooms across Africa, children would be taught two names side by side: Thomassankara and Ibrahim Traore. One was silenced in 1987. The other fell decades later. But both became seeds, planted deep in the soil of Africa, growing into a tree too vast for any empire to cut down. And so, the story ended not in silence, but in a roar that carried across generations. You can kill the man, but you cannot kill the dream. Thank you for watching.